with rent, I have been able to always negotiate at least a couple $100s for all the apartments that I've lived in. I actually had no idea that you could negotiate your bills. You can negotiate your rent. Okay, what else can I do to negotiate? Welcome, everyone. My name is Kimberly, and I hope you came hungry because you're on Ambitious Appetite. So be sure to grab a plate to eat from because oh, do I have some juicy stories to share? Let's dive into today's episode all about how I negotiate everything. The reason why we're talking about this topic is because a lot of people actually really like the breakdown of my New York apartment and how I was able to negotiate. And of course, as a career and business coach, I negotiate a lot in my life. So I thought this could be helpful from a financial perspective, but also just from a negotiating skill set perspective. So what does negotiating really mean? I've done a lot of salary negotiation workshops, but today I'm kind of approaching it from the standpoint of negotiation in terms of like your rent, your bills, your salary, kind of a holistic standpoint. So for me, negotiation is all about, I guess I kind of look at it from the standpoint of, is there a way I can get the monetary bill or the monetary number that I'm provided a little bit, a little bit down. I guess like what I really mean is like, can I get a better deal or can I have an advantage to this financial decision that I'm making? And by financial decision, usually it really comes down to like rent. I have negotiated every single rent that I've ever had. I really take pride of my negotiation skills because it's helped me save some money. And I think, that could be a really strong skill set for anyone that's interested in saving money. So let's kind of talk about how I even got into negotiation because it's really what changed my outlook in life. So my first encounter of like a negotiation, it was my first job offer. So I moved to New York City. If you didn't see my episode on why I moved from Cali to New York, be sure to check that out. I think it was like episode 2 or 3. But when I moved to New York, everything in New York is like 10 times more expensive, right? Or when I moved to the East Coast, everything is just, well, I wouldn't say more expensive. In general, it's expensive. New York City in particular is expensive. So, you gotta have to figure out how to navigate the financial barriers that one might come across. So I really was introduced to negotiation during my job offer because I actually had no idea that you could negotiate your bills. You can negotiate your rent. I just thought you kind of just like take it as it is. I didn't even know you could negotiate your salary. But what ended up happening was I was searching for a job and I have a legal background. So my legal background really kind of influenced the type of roles I was looking for. So I was originally looking at like jobs where I could work at a law firm because in my mind, I thought that was the direction I was going to take. I thought that was going to be something that I was going to pursue. I had received an offer from a law firm for $39K, and this was about, like several years ago, like 6-7 years ago. So I had this offer. I had actually also ended up looking at working for banks as well, not realizing that they would be a very good competitor to a potential offer that I would have. So this law firm came in at $39K. Then this bank offered me $42K. And then the law firm went up to $45K. And then the bank was like, we'll pay you $50K. right? So that was the negotiation. So it was really fun to see these two companies literally fight over me. And, the bank ended up winning because I went with the 50K offer versus the 45. But it was so interesting. Like, it was fun that two companies were fighting over me, but also I was like, oh, I didn't realize that this could be a potential negotiation tactic. I wonder if I can use that in the future. Is there a way that I can negotiate in other areas of my life? So this was when I had actually also moved into my new studio because I got this new job, right? I was getting paid. Getting paid okay at the time. A lot of people at the time thought I was getting paid well, but interns at the bank were literally getting paid the same amount I was getting paid, and I was literally an employee of the company. So I would argue that I could have gotten paid more, as most people would probably say for themselves. But I took this as an opportunity for me to be like, okay, what else can I do to negotiate? Because I was moving into my own studio, I was by myself, I was a single person at the time. I ended up going through my bills, and I first started with Verizon, and I called them up. I was pretty good at talking to customer service support representatives because I was just like, if I'm really nice, because I'm sure they get like really awful, mean people, this could be a way for me to kind of figure out how I can maybe get my bill to go down. What was really cool was that I actually saved like maybe, I think it was like $20, $30 because the school that I went to offered, I guess, like a discount. And even though I wasn't a student, because I guess like my account was still eligible or had that connection, I was able to get a discount. It was like not necessarily a student discount, but I know student discounts were really big back then, but I was able to get like this long lasting discount, and I still have it to this day where I get to save like $20, $30 on my internet bill. So I was able to kind of focus my energy on like having that. And I guess because I worked at a bank, I was able to double the discount that I had. So not only did I get this like student discount, but I was also able to get a discount through my firm. And it was really weird because I was like, oh wow, I didn't realize I could double the discount. But I guess because don't remember exactly what the customer service rep said, but like they didn't interfere with each other. So I was able to get the most and optimize my discount with Verizon. So that's one area. One of the other things I negotiate is on my rent. Like besides utility bills, I mean, it's really hard to negotiate with water and heat, right? You're kind of just paying for what you use. So I think that's ultimately fair. But with rent, I have been able to always negotiate at least a couple $100s for all of the for all the apartments that I've lived in. So my first studio, I paid about $1,650. And originally the asking price was $1,730. So I asked if they can go down to $1,600. And that was just like, okay, I can do $1,600. Like, let me see if I can just start off there. I try to go lower because I'm going to make the assumption that companies or organizations are going to like negotiate higher. So I try to go lower. I mean, in most of my experiences, I think I could have gone lower. I think I went too low for this apartment, but I still won that. But if you can kind of go a little bit lower, but the thing about negotiating your rent is that you have to consider the market. So is there a lot of people interested in this apartment? How long has this apartment been on the market? So typically, if an apartment has been on the market for more than a month, then that's where it's like, okay, is there something wrong with this apartment, or are they just having issues finding tenants to live in it? And if it's finding tenants to live in it, then that's where your leverage kind of increases, right? Because they need someone to fill that spot, or it's just wasting, they're just wasting real estate at that point. I try to examine what's going on in the market, right? Try to understand, like, is this a really good area to live in? Are people, really trying to get this apartment? And if so, if people are interested in the apartment and this apartment has only been on the market for like a week or so, it is a little bit more difficult to negotiate. Your leverage kind of decreases, right? Because the time hasn't proven yet that this apartment is going to be really hard to fill. So at the time, this apartment was a little bit difficult to fill. Or I'm sorry, it wasn't difficult to fill. There was actually several people who were interested in this studio apartment. But the reason why I was able to negotiate is because I basically told them, like, look, if you're someone looking for someone to move in earlier, I'm happy to move in earlier if you reduce the rent down. So there are some things that, landlords really want, right? They want to minimize the amount of time their apartment is not being leased, because really that just means that they're not getting paid, right? So the more you can kind of figure out little things to increase your leverage, it could be moving in earlier, it could be, if they don't have certain appliances, or if their apartment is not really up to date, you can kind of negotiate there. It's kind of like a trial, right? You kind of have to see what the landlord is going to bite, but you don't want to go too hard, because you also don't want the landlord to just not take you, because they could refuse to have you move in. So you kind of want to play a balance, and it's always just been something I've had to learn as I've progressed. But every single rent that I've ever had, I've been able to knock off a couple hundred. This apartment that I'm currently in, like I mentioned in the last episode, I feel pretty proud of it, because I was able to get a lot for what the market was and what it was originally marketed for. So how do you really negotiate, right? Like, what are the tips? So like I said before, one is to understand the market, or understand what your leverage is. So it's important for you to kind of do your due diligence and your research to see, okay, what kind of leverage can I get if possible? If we're specifically looking at it from a rent standpoint, you need to understand, when are you moving? Are you moving during the summer when there's tons of people trying to move into the city or trying to move into the area that you're looking at? Or are you moving in the winter when there's like very, very low turnover? And, that's usually a sign of when landlords are more willing to kind of negotiate with you. Also, you can consider like the actual state of the apartment. Are there no modern appliances? Is it very, very outdated? Is there a dishwasher or a washer dryer in the building? Like, you can kind of take a look at all these different things about the apartment and kind of use that as like, hey, either you drop my rent to this number, or ideally these need to get fixed, right? I mean, of course, I would probably say you would want to get those things fixed regardless, but it's just a strategy that I think you can use, because sometimes you can caulk things yourself, you can fix things yourself, and you don't necessarily need a landlord to do that. And if it's like, shaving off like $200, you can probably go to the hardware store, pick up the items for less than $200 a month, and be able to make your money back, right? Those are just kind of some things to consider. The second thing about negotiation is timing is everything, right? So to be able to know when to negotiate is important. And it's usually how I've negotiated is when I know that I am going to be the person who's going to take this apartment. Typically, even if I don't get the negotiation, if I don't win the negotiation, it's not going to heavily influence whether or not I get that apartment, right? I'm going to get the apartment either way. But because oftentimes, in order to even be considered or get the apartment, you have to go through an application. You have to be approved. They have to do a background check on you and all this stuff. And sometimes there's an application fee. So you want to be able to go through all those steps to then be able to say, oh, by the way, given what's going on, we're happy to move in earlier. Could you drop the rent down? Because like, what are they going to do, right? They're going to either have to say no and then restart the whole search of finding an apartment if they don't have other applicants, right? If they don't have anyone else interested in the apartment. So it's now going to take them even longer to find another tenant. So oftentimes, at least what has been in my case, negotiating has always played in my favor because I am willing to get that apartment at that price, but I always try to negotiate once I'm approved, because once you're approved, it's kind of like, well, it's clear that they can see that you afford it, but you're just trying to get a better deal, right? So that's like the second thing. The third thing, it's about leverage, but I'm kind of touching to what I mentioned as the first bullet point. But what I mean by leverage is understanding both sides of the situation. So you kind of have to understand the landlord situation, and you kind of have to understand the perspective of your situation, which you obviously do. But I find that people always struggle with understanding the landlord's perspective, right? Because the landlord is there to make money. They're there to essentially make money off of you because they have real estate. You want this real estate, and you're willing to pay a price to rent out that real estate. So when you kind of understand the perspective of the landlord, it's actually so much easier for you to think about what the leverage could be for you as a potential tenant, right? So if the landlord is really easygoing and they can see that you have good income, they can see that you're a good tenant from your past history, they're probably more likely to accept a negotiation from you because they're going to speculate that you're a good tenant, right? Most often, landlords would rather have a good tenant than not a good tenant, right? So because landlords have to pay out of pocket to replace appliances, to replace or maintain the building or the specific things that apartment might have, just from like time and the use of things. So most landlords, I will say, I'm not going to make a blanket statement here because I'm not a landlord myself, but just from my perspective and experience, most landlords are willing to take off a couple $100s a month or remove a pet fee for a tenant that has a good record or that can prove that they're a good tenant, right? And that's just from being really nice, from, having like a very professional conversation with them. When you come from their perspective and you approach the conversation by saying like, hey, look, this apartment doesn't seem to have any modern appliances. Would you be able to replace those appliances or just give me a lower rent, right? And, not all landlords are like this. Some landlords can be very, very awful, but this is where it you have to think about all the different factors that play into this. Do you really want this apartment? Do you not want this apartment? Do you think that this is somewhere where you can live long term, or is it just a short term apartment for you? Is this something you really need now, or can you wait and look at other apartments, right? So there's a lot of factors to consider that can help you with your negotiation strategy, because really, ultimately, you want to make sure you're approaching the negotiation from like a strategic standpoint. You want to make sure that you are providing a well-backed argument to say like, hey, it's not going to be too much for you to just scrape off a couple $100s. I've literally negotiated every single rent that I have, so I hope that you kind of take away these tips and negotiate your rent the next time, because I will say, specifically in New York, the average rent now apparently is $5,000, and that's like ridiculous. I'm not paying $5,000 for an apartment. I'm currently not paying that. Don't plan to pay for that price. Hopefully, if you're listening or watching this, you can kind of use this for your next negotiation. And when it comes to salary, my best advice is to have another offer. When you have another offer, and I've done this a lot with most of my offers, is when you have an offer come in and you're already in the final stages of another job, and you tell that other company that you're in the final stages with that you have an offer, what has happened, at least for me, is that company will come in with a competing offer. Because then these companies are going to be like, oh, wow, you're such a high quality candidate that another company is willing to pay for you. So like now we want you even more, right? So you kind of have to to build up to that. And how you can do that is by interviewing with a lot of companies that are competitive with one another, right? Like you want to make sure you're interviewing as much as you can, so that way when you get to the end point, you can have these companies basically saying, no, we want you more, no, we want you more, and thus you have like a good option. Though I will say I was recently in that position and I turned down the offer that had more money, which I'm thinking about talking about in a different episode, because, you know, my prior advice before being put into that situation, and again, this is like a case by case, I used to always say, go accept the job that provides you with the most salary. Now, in this case, I did not do that. And I think like my advice is now going to change because it really just depends on the situation. Be sure to follow and like if you want to hear that episode, because I think it's a really interesting one. It was a hard decision to make, but I went with the job offer that didn't actually give the highest monetary base salary. Now the total comps were comparable with one another. Like they're very close. But I ended up going with the base salary that was a little bit lower, and I have my own reasons why. But going back to salary negotiation, the best way you can have an effective salary negotiation is when you have multiple offers in your book, because then it's like a guarantee that you're an amazing candidate, and it only just adds to further reason why it's worth asking for more. Right. So hopefully that all helps. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode on how I negotiate everything and you got these tips, and hopefully you can use them for your next negotiation or potential opportunity to negotiate. Thank you all so much for watching and listening to Ambitious Appetite. We've already hit 50 subscribers on YouTube and 10 followers on Spotify. So please be sure to like, comment, follow, rate us 5 stars on Spotify. Would mean so much to me. I've been having so much fun doing these podcasts, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.